At Christmas, my mother did what she always does. She brought out the old photo albums, set them on the table, and presented them as if she'd just discovered some hidden treasure, not the same pages we'd all seen year after year. My fiancé sat beside me, quietly observing everything, picking up on the details the rest of us ignored. My sister was there too, swirling her wine, dressed in her typical expensive taste, her boyfriend nodding along, blending in with the background noise. My parents smiled, played their part, asked surface-level questions, and moved on. No one ever asked me anything. I used to count how long it would take for them to pretend I wasn't even there. This year, it was 9 minutes. After dessert, the ritual began. My mother's hands clapped together, the albums were opened, and everyone pretended to be surprised. We all knew the script: birthdays, trips, awkward school photos, my sister's baby pictures, my mother glowing, my father proud. Then my album, page after page. This is when everything shifted. My fiancé's posture changed. His eyes lingered too long on certain pictures. His hand found mine under the table, squeezed tightly. But he said nothing. My heart started to race, an old instinct from childhood. Whenever the energy in the room would turn, whenever I sensed something wrong and knew not to draw attention to it. After a while, we made our excuses and left. My mother protested out of habit. My father said nothing. My sister never looked up from her phone. In the car, my fiancé handed me a few photographs. He had picked them from the pile without me noticing. I looked at them, confused. The same face, the same expression, over and over again, pasted into different settings like a bad copy-paste job that nobody cared enough to fix. My mind couldn't make sense of it at first. It felt surreal, but also frighteningly logical. There was no variation, no natural change, just repetition. In one photo, a baby appeared, one with pale skin and different features. My fiancé's quiet certainty in the car became my own. Something was wrong. The truth was beginning to leak through, not in a dramatic wave, but like water under a door, slow and unstoppable. I sat up that night, unable to sleep, staring at the photographs. My memories before age 5 were a blank, a void I had learned to accept. I had always believed what I was told: trauma, the war, the mind protecting itself. I was the strong one, the independent child who never needed anything. At least, that's what my parents always said. But the warmth, the obvious affection, the love, those belonged to my younger sister. There were no birthday parties for me, no camcorder tapes, no aunts or uncles from the old country. Only silence and carefully constructed stories, holes patched up with the same excuses. I realized I had never really belonged to this family in the way I thought I did. It was not just distance, it was an absence that was built into the foundation of my life. That night, after we left my parents' house, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every moment from the evening in my head, searching for clues, trying to make sense of the photographs. I laid the pictures out on the nightstand beside my bed and stared at them one after another. It was unmistakable. My face exactly the same, repeated in photo after photo, different places, different outfits, but the same expression, the same angle, the same frozen smile. There was no warmth in those images, no trace of life between them. They looked like they had been assembled by someone who understood how things should appear, but never understood how real life actually feels. I looked at the picture of the baby, the one with lighter hair and a different jawline, and I understood suddenly that it wasn't me. I realized I had no memory of being a baby, not even fragments. My earliest memory was of standing in a brightly lit hallway in a foreign country, holding my mother's hand, told to smile for a stranger holding a clipboard. I never questioned why everything before that moment was a void. I had accepted what I was told, that my childhood was erased by war, that trauma had shut the door on those early years. But the explanation no longer made sense. I kept thinking about the silence that always followed when I asked about our family back home. No visits, no calls, no stories except vague warnings about danger and loss. There was always a distance, always a reason to move on to another subject. When my sister was born, the house changed overnight. There were new traditions, real celebrations, videotapes, and scrapbooks. There was a kind of love that was loud and visible, one I only ever saw from a distance. I convinced myself it was because I was older, because my parents were still learning, because things were different then. But that excuse became harder to believe. It was only me who had no history. The photos were wrong, the timeline didn't add up, and nobody ever spoke of the years before we moved. One day when I was 15, I walked in on my mother reading a message in a language I couldn't read. Her hands were shaking as she deleted it and blocked the sender. She told me it was spam, but I saw the name and the hearts in the message. Spam never makes your hands shake. I let it go, just like I always did. I grew up with a constant low-level fear and anxiety that never faded. I was diagnosed with PTSD in high school. My therapist talked about trauma, but the war was never what scared me. It was the way my mother looked at me when she thought I wasn't watching, the way my father turned silent and distant whenever I asked questions about the past. That night, with the photos lined up on my nightstand and my fiancé sleeping beside me, I tried to remember. The memories came slowly, small flashes at first. A woman who wasn't my mother, a language I barely understood, the scent of citrus. I remembered a hand holding mine, a feeling of safety, then the panic, the confusion, the command not to speak of certain things. My childhood was not what I had been told. I understood in pieces that something had been taken from me, that my life had started with a break, a fracture that everyone around me pretended did not exist. When the realization fully settled in, I felt hollow. I was not grieving a family, but the idea of ever having belonged to one. By morning, the emptiness inside me had been replaced with a sharp, clear determination. I spent hours searching through records, searching my own memories, trying to piece together the truth. My fiancé watched over me, careful, attentive, but unable to reach me where I was. When the official email from the police came, confirming a case file had been opened, something inside me shifted again. I realized the truth could not be ignored anymore. It was real, not just in my head, not just a feeling. I showed the email to my fiancé, watched him read it twice, saw the understanding in his eyes. He said it was real now, but it had always been real for me, even when I had no words for it. 2 days passed before my parents showed up at my door, carrying the weight of the truth with them. They sat on my couch and tried to act normal, but there was a tightness in the air, a sense that everything had changed. My mother said she brought soup, the same kind she made when I was a child and sick, a detail that suddenly felt hollow and performative. They spoke to the police, she said, almost defensively, as if I had made a mistake by not coming to them first. I asked them if they would have told me the truth. The silence that followed answered everything. My father finally admitted it. I was not their biological daughter. My mother said my birth mother was young, unable to care for me, and that she had begged them to take me. There were no details, no addresses, just a name and a list of reasons that never quite explained anything. My father said they rescued me, not stole me. My mother insisted they only wanted what was best, but the facts remained. My early years had been erased, my history rewritten, my real family left behind. After they left, the apartment felt empty and exposed, like the lies that had built my childhood had been swept away, leaving only the bare truth. I stared at the photograph my mother insisted was real, holding it with a numb detachment. For a few moments, I wanted to believe them. I wanted to think they had done something brave or loving. But it was only relief at having the story out in the open, not forgiveness. I asked for the name of my birth mother. They gave it to me like a confession. Mara Petrovich. That was all they offered. I realized then that their story had never been about me, only about what I could do for them, how I could fill a role in their new life, in a new country. That night, my fiance and I started searching. We found the name on a grainy social media profile. The woman looked like me. Same eyes, same jaw, same haunted expression. We messaged her in broken Serbian, hoping for a response, feeling the possibility of answers for the first time. The reply came in the morning. All it said was, "Can we talk?" I felt the ground shift beneath me, knowing that the real story was only beginning. The day of the video call felt unreal. Time moved slowly. I spent hours on edge, moving from room to room, unable to focus on anything except the coming conversation. My fiancé handled the details. He typed, he checked the connection, he scheduled, he did all the things I couldn't. I just sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the empty screen, trying to steady my breathing. In my mind, I rehearsed what I would say, but nothing sounded right. I wasn't even sure what I wanted to hear from her. I had lived my whole life with an absence at the center, a gap where the beginning should be, and now it was supposed to be filled in one call. It felt impossible. I tried to prepare myself, but nothing could. When her face finally appeared on the screen, I felt my entire body tense. I recognized her instantly. There was a familiarity that went deeper than memory. It was in the way she looked at me, the way her eyes searched my face for something lost. I could see she was exhausted, but beneath it all there was hope, raw and exposed. That hope scared me. I had to remind myself to breathe. She told me she had searched for me for 25 years. She described every place she'd looked, every official she'd pleaded with, every day spent waiting for news that never came. She explained that she had left me with a neighbor, someone she trusted, while she ran errands, something she had done before. When she returned, I was gone. She went to the police. She went to camps, hospitals, shelters. She put up flyers, asked everyone she could find. The war made everything more complicated. People disappeared all the time. Most were never found. She never gave up, even when everyone else told her to accept that I was lost. For her, there was no closure, just the endless ache of not knowing. She said my name as it once was, a name that felt unfamiliar on the surface but settled deep inside me, as if I'd been waiting to hear it for years. I learned that she had tried to leave the country through a resettlement program, that families with children got priority. She was accepted, but after I disappeared, she was removed from the list. Her whole future changed the moment I was taken. She said she could never bring herself to leave without me. I heard the pain in her voice, the guilt, the years lost. I listened and tried to process what it meant. I was not given up, I was taken, and my absence shaped not only my life, but hers too. It became clear to me that my so-called parents had needed me for their own escape. Without me, they had no chance of starting over in a new country. That was why they created the false history, why they forged photos, why they kept everything so tightly controlled. I was not just a child to them, I was a means to an end. My whole existence with them was built on necessity, not love. Every act of care, every ritual, every tradition, now it felt calculated, not genuine. The weight of that realization was almost unbearable. It meant that everything I had believed about my place in the world was wrong. The call ended with plans to meet. My fiancé said he would help arrange things, but I could hardly hear him. My mind raced with questions, fragments of memory, the constant echo of loss. I sat in silence after the call, replaying every word, trying to commit the details to memory so they couldn't be taken from me again. I thought about the woman I had called mother for so many years, and how she had never told me the truth, not even when confronted. I thought about all the times I had wondered why I felt so different, so apart. Now I understood. The separation was real, not imagined. In the days that followed, I tried to function. I went to work, I answered emails, I moved through routines, but nothing felt real. I saw my reflection in windows and felt like I was looking at a stranger. The urge to find answers grew stronger. I started to gather every document, every photo, every scrap of evidence I had about my childhood. I wanted to see for myself what was true and what was constructed. My fiancé watched me, careful not to crowd me, but always there. He researched legal options, contacted authorities, wrote lists of what needed to be done. He asked if I wanted to press charges, if I wanted to fight for justice, or simply walk away. I didn't know what I wanted. I only knew that I couldn't go back. For the first time, I thought about the future, not as a continuation of someone else's story, but as something that might finally belong to me. The hope I saw in my mother's face on the call stayed with me, fragile but persistent. I didn't know if I could ever feel whole or if the damage could ever be undone. But I knew I had to try. The only way forward was through the truth, however hard it might be. The years of silence, the years of pretending, were over. What happened next would be decided by me. 2 weeks after that call, I found myself standing inside a police station with my birth mother beside me. The moment was stripped of any drama, just fluorescent lights, cheap furniture, and the tired patience of an officer taking notes. We waited in line. I watched her hands fidget with an old flyer, corners worn down by decades of searching. The missing person notice still bore my first name, the name she had given me, printed above a photo taken in a time I couldn't remember. It all felt distant, like I was reading about someone else's life, even though every step was happening to me. When they asked me questions, I answered automatically. I gave the facts as I understood them, the timeline, the places, the photographs. Each detail was met with more paperwork, more forms to fill out, more proof that what I had always felt was finally, in some way, being acknowledged. I handed over the photos, the ones that had exposed everything, the copies of myself, the unnatural repetition, the false attempts at childhood. They made digital scans and asked about the people who had raised me. I described my life with them as best I could, even as I felt numb and disconnected from those memories. Each fact became another line in a file, another step towards something that might look like justice. The process was slow. Every day that passed felt like a test of endurance. My birth mother stayed close, never pushing, simply being present. She handled the logistics with the same quiet focus I had seen in myself all my life. I saw now where I had learned it, from her. At home, my fiancé took over the rest, appointments, research, calls to legal aid. I barely spoke to my sister during those weeks. She kept her distance, but I could tell she was watching, uncertain what to say, maybe afraid of what would happen if she let herself believe any of it. As the investigation moved forward, the reality of what had happened to me became a matter of record. The authorities found inconsistencies in every document my parents had ever filed, forged records, falsified forms, a web of deceit that reached back to the day they crossed the border. Their American citizenship was revoked. There were hearings, but no trial. The evidence was overwhelming. In the end, they were simply removed. Deportation papers were served. I received notice by mail, nothing more than a few official lines on government letterhead, telling me that the people who had raised me were no longer allowed in the country. There was no closure, no final confrontation, just an empty space where family used to be. My sister stayed behind. Her silence in those days was louder than any words could have been. Eventually, she came to see me, standing awkwardly in my kitchen, looking at everything except my face. She said it was wrong, all of it. That was the closest either of us came to an apology. We did not try to pretend we were sisters in the way other people are. What we had was a fragile, cautious understanding, born out of circumstance more than affection. Over time, we talked more, about small things, about routines, about coffee and work. I realized that even in a house built on lies, people still learn to love in whatever way they can. My birth mother moved to the United States as soon as she was able. The family reunification program processed her paperwork. My fiancé and I filled out forms, tracked deadlines, gathered everything required to build a life from scratch for the second time. She found a job at a bakery near my apartment. Sometimes she came over after her shift, flour still dusting her hands. She told me stories about her life before everything changed, stories I listened to in quiet wonder, trying to connect the woman in front of me with the memories I never had. Throughout this time, I felt myself changing. The emptiness that had followed me for years did not disappear, but it stopped growing. Instead, a kind of cautious hope began to take its place. My birth mother's presence was never demanding. She did not try to erase my past or claim what was lost. She simply offered what she could: small gestures, shared meals, silence when words were too heavy. For the first time, I saw a future that might be my own. The anger I felt toward the people who took me did not turn to forgiveness. I let them go, piece by piece, until all that was left was the simple truth of survival. Freedom arrived quietly without fanfare. It was the ability to make decisions for myself, to choose how to spend my days, to set boundaries and keep them. I planned my wedding. I built routines. I learned to trust my instincts, to listen to the voice inside me that knew what was real and what was constructed. I understood that justice was not something given, but something found in the slow, steady process of reclaiming my own life. When I thought back on everything that had happened, I did not feel heroic or tragic. I felt human, damaged, resilient, and unfinished. The people who had built their lives on lies lost everything, but I gained the chance to become myself. The years I lost could never be replaced, but the years ahead belonged to me. I was no longer anyone's project, anyone's ticket to freedom. I was simply myself, free to begin again, however uncertain the future might be. After everything was over, there was no catharsis. The people who had raised me left the country in silence. Not a scene, not a final confrontation, not a word left behind. Their absence filled the space in my life with a strange quiet. It was not relief or grief, but something emptier, a pause that lingered in every room. My real mother settled into her new life with the careful routines of someone who had learned not to expect too much from happiness. She rented a small apartment, took the early shifts at the bakery, saved every receipt, stacked every bill in neat piles. Sometimes she would visit me and we would sit at my kitchen table drinking coffee, sharing the ordinary details of our days. There were no attempts to recapture lost years, no declarations about the future. We both understood the fragility of what had been rebuilt. I moved through life in much the same way. I kept working, planning the wedding, tending to chores and appointments as if nothing had changed, but in small ways, everything had. I noticed I was less afraid to take up space, less willing to fade into the background. I stopped apologizing for things that were not my fault. When people asked about my family, I learned to tell the truth, flat and simple, without shame or embellishment. There was no tidy summary, no narrative arc that made sense to anyone outside the experience. I told people my parents had been deported for crimes I could not forgive. I told them I was reconnecting with my real mother after decades apart. Sometimes I watched the confusion flicker in their eyes. Most people did not ask for more. For the first time, I did not care whether they understood. My relationship with my sister changed too. In the weeks and months that followed, she became a quiet constant in my life. She did not try to make sense of what had happened or ask for forgiveness for things she had not done. She brought over groceries, left notes by my door, asked about work and the weather. Our connection was thin and tentative, made up of habits and routines rather than memories, but it was real in its own way. I stopped expecting it to become something else. I stopped measuring it against other people's ideas of family. The old ways of belonging no longer applied. With my real mother, every small gesture became significant. She learned how I liked my coffee. She remembered my favorite foods. We watched television together, sometimes in silence, sometimes laughing at shows neither of us really understood. She told me about her childhood, her parents, the life she imagined for herself before the war. I listened and tried to picture myself as part of that world. I learned to accept that some things would always be missing. There were years I could never get back, questions with no answers, and pain that could not be explained away by time or circumstance. My fiancé was steady throughout it all. He helped me find routines that felt safe. He never pushed me to talk about what had happened, never tried to fix anything. He listened, he waited, he made space for my anger and confusion without trying to move me past them. Planning the wedding was simple, almost mechanical, a series of tasks that offered comfort in their predictability. When the invitations went out, my real mother cried quietly in the hallway. I held her hand and realized that even in the most fractured stories, there could be moments of peace. Sometimes I would wake up in the night and feel the weight of everything that had changed. I would remember the old photos, the way my face never fit, the sense of being a ghost in my own childhood. Those memories became less sharp with time, but they never disappeared completely. The truth had come late, but it came, and it took away the shame that had shadowed so much of my life. I stopped searching for validation from the people who raised me. I stopped needing answers from the past. Freedom for me was not dramatic. It arrived in the slow permission to exist for myself. I chose who to keep in my life, who to let go. I chose how to tell my story, and who was allowed to hear it. I stopped waiting for apologies, stopped expecting anyone else to fix what had been broken. I learned that sometimes survival is enough, and that moving forward does not require understanding every piece of what went wrong. I accepted that my life would always have gaps. Years lost, relationships changed, histories rewritten. I learned to live with the emptiness, to see it as space for something new. In the end, the story that began with deception did not end with revenge or reconciliation. It ended quietly, with a new beginning built on truth. I did not forgive the people who hurt me, but I stopped letting them define who I was. I became someone who could build trust again, someone who could choose her own boundaries, her own story, her own peace. The years ahead were uncertain, but they were mine. I learned to recognize myself in the details. The way I organize a kitchen, the sound of my laughter, the stubbornness that kept me searching for answers when everyone else let go. These things, small and mundane, became the evidence of who I really was. I learned to love myself not as a victim, not as someone who was stolen or lost, but as someone who survived, endured, and started again. The life that was taken from me could never be returned, but the life I chose was enough. Now, when I look at my own reflection, I do not see a stranger. I see someone who found her way out, who rebuilt from almost nothing, who made peace with the silence and the absence and the pain. I know I am not defined by what was done to me. I am defined by what I choose to become next.